Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamani. This week I have for you the video of a Q&A that my virtual book club held with author Kellie Carter Jackson about her book, We Refuse. Enjoy it. Welcome to Professor Kellie Carter Jackson. She is the Denise Kellen 68 Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. She is an award-winning author of a book called Force and Freedom that was published just before this. She's also the author of many other things, but that is going to, I think, factor in a little bit to our conversation. I will say that I watched the Apple TV series called Lincoln's Dilemma. If you're interested at all in rethinking Lincoln and you have a subscription to Apple TV, that was a terrific series. And Professor, I don't know if it's Carter Jackson or just Jackson, but
it doesn't matter. It's okay.
Doesn't matter. Okay. Professor Carter Jackson was in a lot of that series and did an amazing job. So we really appreciate you being here. We've been talking about your book over 3 sessions, bi-weekly sessions, and so really excited to ask you some questions about the work. So let me start by saying that Force and Freedom was where I first became familiar with your work. The subtitle Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence, and this Colt 1851 revolver on the cover obviously gets a lot of people's attention.
It's arresting.
Yes, indeed. And so, when I finished this and started We Refuse, I thought, okay, I think this next book, it's going to sort of continue and maybe accentuate the focus on Black women. And I think that sort of expectation was fulfilled. But the other thing I thought was that it was going to pick up the story from the Civil War, where Force and Freedom ends, and just kind of continue the story into the next phase of history. But obviously the book is quite different. So the way that it's organized, the framing of the question. So tell us a little bit about how you decided, to write this follow-up book, but in a very different way, in terms of the framework, in terms of the voice. Everything is quite different.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for reading my book. I tell people all the time, like, all writers just want to be read. We just want to be read. So even if you don't like the book, I'm like, but you gave it time and money. So I'm always grateful for that. This book was a little bit different because I was not intending to write this book. This book started out as an op-ed. And after I wrote the op-ed, and the op-ed was for The Atlantic, it kind of went viral. And a bunch of publishers approached me and they were like, oh, is this a book? Is this a book? And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, it can be.
Not at all plan that. And so, but as the summer of 2020 progressed, it became clear, like, no, I have so much more to say. And I wrote it mostly out of frustration and anger. And I felt like that was a good thing because it kept me very passionate about the topic. It kept me wanting to say more. I wanted to make it more expansive. Force and Freedom is sort of narrow in its lens. I'm just looking at the abolitionist movement. I'm just looking at Black abolitionists. I'm just looking at those who looked at violence. Whereas with We Refuse, I wanted to take on a much bigger terrain and start with sort of the Haitian Revolution. In my dissertation, actually, I spent a lot of time talking about the Haitian Revolution, and I cut major parts of that from Force and Freedom. And it's so interesting with writing because, you can cut a lot of things, but it's like you use everything. You use all the fat, all the things you may not come back to, because you never know when you might need to pull on that thing again. And so that's what I did with We Refuse. And also because I feel like I have tenure now and I am much more protected and comfortable with my voice. I could be a little bit more snarky, a little bit more emphatic, a little bit more sort of like the voice that I want to have, not just for how I write, but even when I'm reading other people. I love it when a writer is direct, and I love it when a writer is very clear about their agenda, because
Mhm.
then it doesn't feel dishonest. It feels like, oh, okay, there's no attempt to sort of put on the veil of objectivity. I think objectivity is a myth. I think it's much more honest to write like, no, this is where I stand. This is how I feel. And these are the evidence and arguments that I'm putting into it. And so you can agree or disagree, but it feels, I don't know, kind of liberating to write in that way. So
Well, I
yeah,
would,
this was
I'd say, the subtitle is a forceful history of Black resistance, and it's not just a forceful history in the sense of a history of force, but it's forcefully written. I would say. I mean, it does.
good. That's what I want.
It hits
Permission of conflict.
hard, and I think we have some questions about some of those hard teachings. And so I'll let, in the interest of moving forward, the book centers on 5 remedies by which Black people have responded to white supremacy: revolution, protection, force, flight, and joy. You say
Yeah.
each is a response to the violence of white supremacy, and each is distinct. And so, one of my questions is, you talk about it in that terms as remedies, but I think
Mm,
in the text itself, there really, I think, is only one remedy, and to me, and that would be revolution, and the other ones
mm,
are various. There's certainly responses, but like
mhm,
flight and joy, you say yourself, are, they're more of a healing balm. They don't really
mm.
address the underlying problem. So how did you conceptualize, or how did
Yeah.
you even come about those? And are they presented in a particular order for a reason, or is that
Yeah.
just convenient?
Yeah. No, I this book originally was gonna be called The Remedy, actually.
Mhm.
And the publisher didn't like that, which I like We Refuse much better anyways. But I chose remedies because I think that remedies are not cures. When I
Mm.
think about the story that opens up with my great grandmother, my ancestor had a remedy for her, but it wasn't necessarily a cure. Like, she saved her life, but she still had a limp. She still had the effects of this, what we believe to be tetanus or some sort of infection. Um, I think remedies are a little bit more organic and patchwork, and maybe a little less scientific or sort of um, institutional, I would say. And so I wanted to think of something that would look at racism and say, maybe we don't have a cure because maybe we can't eradicate it. But how do we have a remedy? How do we bandage these wounds? How do we sort of fortify ourselves so that we can thrive and survive despite, the damage, despite the harm that has happened? Because I'm not completely convinced that you can repair the violence that has been done by oppression and white supremacy, but I do think that there are remedies. And so while revolution feels like the most sort of obvious address to that, I still see revolutions as a beginning and not an end.
Mm.
That, like, you can't just sort of say like, okay, we won, and then sort of, walk away from it, because we see what happens, that like these battles are ongoing. I mean, if we
Yeah.
were to sort of like tap out after Reconstruction or after the 15th Amendment and sort of rest on those laurels, that's not enough. That the work continues. And so I don't know. To me, it's also important to say that these aren't an exhaustive list because I wanted someone else to come and continue this conversation. So,
Okay.
what are the things that I did not include? What are other remedies that should be considered? I think good writing should be generative, like it should foster additional conversations for people to sort of pick up that baton and keep going.
Yeah.
So maybe my next book will do that, or maybe somebody else will, pick up that mantle. But mostly I just wanted it to be a conversation starter, something generative, something that people could work with.
Yeah.
We
Well,
get
yeah.
emotion.
And I mean, obviously you can't do everything. So you did cover a
Well, yeah,
lot, and
that too.
and it certainly generated a lot of conversation. And when I was soliciting kind of questions from our group, there was probably the most asked question is the one I'll start with.
Mhm.
And this came up especially kind of in the last session. It has to do with the definition of, and maybe especially the distinction between whiteness and white supremacy and white people if there is a
Mm,
distinction, and I wonder if you
yes.
can just talk a little bit about that, because
Yes, there is a distinction. Thank you for asking that. Nobody ever asked that question.
well, this is
I
a
feel
smart
like,
group, so.
yes. I feel like in a lot of ways, whiteness and white supremacy are very similar. So when I think of white supremacy, I think of the idea of whiteness as supreme, the idea of whiteness as omnipotent, as all powerful, as the ability to sort of dictate and set the terms. And these are very violent and oppressive and exploitative terms. There's nothing sort of redeemable from white supremacy. And I often see how whiteness can be a subset of that, how, or a shorthand for that, in the way that whiteness can be weaponized, how whiteness can be employed to do the work of white supremacy. But I think that white people are different in that white supremacy and whiteness talks about systems and institutions and cultures and ideas. And white people can be a part of that, but white people on their own are their own identity, just like Black people are their own identity. And so I've always tried to be very careful about how I use white people and whiteness and white supremacy, because they're not necessarily interchangeable, but because whiteness does so much work on behalf of white people, sometimes it can be a little difficult to disentangle the two ideas. Um, but when I'm often speaking about whiteness, I'm really speaking about white supremacy. I'm speaking about the power structures. I'm speaking about the institutionalness of it. Um, and then there are ways that you could talk about white people on an individual level, like the doctor, at the start of the book.
Mhm.
Um, but even the actions that he's doing is representative of white supremacy. So it seems like they're all the same, but they're not. But they work very well hand in hand. They can feed into one another.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, that's where it's generative of this discussion, because I think, a lot of us as we're reading, we're like, is she talking about us? Is that me? Did I, and it's really a matter of thinking about, in what
Yeah.
sense, might we be complicit, even if we think we're not, in what ways it's
Yeah.
like that's beyond, what we're doing. Um, so I will say that, this is a very diverse group. We're not all academics. There are a couple of academics among the group, but we're just sort of generally a group of people who got together because of our interest in guns, really.
Hmm.
So this was probably the least gunny book that we read, but we will have some gun questions for you. But I want
Yes,
to I want to
please.
throw it over to. And the reason I said that is because we do actually have a history professor here, Ed Onachi. So Ed, I want to throw the first non-David question over to you.
Hmm.
Great. Thank you, David, and thank you, Professor Carter Jackson, for being here.
Hmm.
I have a lot of questions, but the
Sure.
one that I'll ask for now is about how you talk about democracy being antithetical to slavery.
Hmm.
And in particular, I've heard scholars refer to, systems like the one in the United States as a Herrenvolk democracy,
Hmm.
one that
A
favors a
herringbone?
particular
Did you say herringbone?
Herrenvolk. If
Oh,
I'm
okay.
pronouncing that correctly, I might be butchering it myself.
That's okay. That's okay.
But yeah, Herrenvolk is how I've heard it said. Herrenvolk democracy, one in which a favored ethnic group or race has access to all the rights and privileges guaranteed to be protected by the law,
Hmm.
and anybody else is kind of left outside. Not even kind of is left
Yeah.
outside and is not protected.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, how do you make sense of that? Do you
Hmm.
see the idea of a Herrenvolk democracy, a Herrenvolk system, as being a challenge to the idea that democracy and slavery are antithetical, or is it no challenge at all?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm looking at democracy from a very sort of textbook definition, America is not a democracy, right? Like on paper and the way that our ideals sort of are perpetuated, but in practice, absolutely not. When you think of democracy, I think that there is consensus solidarity that all people are given rights, that all people are protected. And because America has its birth or its origin story in this hypocrisy, in which slavery and democracy are trying to coexist, um, it's always baffled Black people. It has always been one of those things where it's like, no, you can't have slavery and have democracy. But yet, Thomas Jefferson is writing the Declaration of Independence while being served by enslaved people. You know, that many of the founding fathers were themselves slaveholders, and they did not see themselves in conflict, even though they were very much aware, because other founding fathers are like, yeah, you know, and it kind of like messed up that like we're pushing for our own freedom while suppressing the freedom of others. And it's like, shh, we're not going to talk about that. You know, like Abigail Adams has that great quote where she's like, the hypocrisy here is like knows no bounds. So I see them as different. I think that African Americans have always forced the United States to live up to its ideals, to drop the charade, to sort of like, no, be who you say you are. And who are you? We're going to define that. Like enslaved people, the most marginalized group, will actually and should actually set the terms for what democracy should look like, how inclusive it really should be. So no, I mean, even if you're talking about today, we don't have a democracy, we have an oligarchy. You know, like we don't have even if you look at, you know, voting rights, we don't have a democracy. We have an electoral college. You know, like we don't really have a democracy in the way that it should be understood and interpreted. We have theory, we don't have practice. So maybe sort of the herringbone way is the way of looking at it and sort of saying like, yes, this is hypocrisy. But that's really what it is. You cannot, from my opinion, you cannot have slavery and democracy at the same time. And democracy is a farce when you call it like that. And that's what Frederick Douglass called out all the time, you know. That's what what does the 4th of July to the slave mean? That's what his whole speech is about, the hypocrisy of democracy and slavery.
And any follow-up to that? Not necessary, but just
no, not right now. No.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So I see. I don't know whether he's here actively because he's got his video turned off. But Marcin, are you there? Marcin, there he is.
Sorry. Yes, I am. Sorry. I'm unfortunately I'm setting up for about to be teaching a private lesson in 10 minutes, so I'm going to drop in 10 minutes.
Okay, well, good. We have a chance to get to your question before you have to go.
Yeah, let's do it.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I guess the first question was, whatever happened to Grandma's gun?
What happened to what?
What happened to your grandmother's gun?
Oh, my dad has it. My dad has it. Now, I suspect I will probably get it with if he wills it to me, you know. But yeah, my dad still has it. I when I went home maybe a couple years ago, my mom showed it to me. I was like, "You still have the gun?" She was like, "Oh yeah, I still have it." And so she was like, "It's pretty," and I was like, "Yeah, it is pretty. It's nice. It's cute."
It was curious. Yeah.
And you had a
very cool that it's still in the family.
He said, "Is it still in the family?"
No, he said it's very cool that it's still in the family.
Oh yeah, and it will stay. It will stay in the family. It will stay in the. It's probably the only gun in the family. You know, my family does not have a strong gun tradition, I should say. But my in-laws, quite the opposite. My in-laws have like an arsenal.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
you're in a mixed marriage.
I am in a mixed marriage. Yeah. And it's been interesting because before I had children, we had maybe 13 guns, I would say, because my husband was in the military. So, mostly hunting rifles because his dad and brothers, they hunt every Thanksgiving, they go deer hunting. And so hunting's been a big part of their like family tradition. But I just got my gun license about 4 months ago. So in Massachusetts, you have to have a gun license.
Yeah.
And I took the class and I went to the range, and I have a very deep respect for like gun ownership, and I think I have a healthy respect of guns. I'm still intimidated by guns. I think I'll always be somewhat intimidated by guns. But I appreciate their utility, and yeah, I'm still trying to get better at using them. I need to go to the range more, to be honest. But I also have conflicts because, you know, I have 3 young kids and my husband doesn't feel comfortable having guns in the house. So so now all of his guns are at his brother's house. But I am always open to letting that dynamic change. You know what I mean? As my kids get older, I want my son to be able to go hunting with his dad and his grandfather and his uncles. I want him to be able to have that tradition. But it's tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are questions I think everybody should be thinking about, you know, whether
Yeah.
they do or not.
Yeah.
Marcin, I'm going to ask your other question since your audio is a little bit rough right now. This is also a question that Kirk had, I think, a variant of, which is force still a valid option today? You know, and if so, kind of what does it look like? And Kirk's sort of, you know, riff on that was, in light of recent events, is force a more or less attractive kind of fallback option? So how are you thinking about force in this state?
I know. This is
There's
tough.
just,
Oh, sorry, Marcin, go
I was
ahead.
going to say there's one other thing, and I don't know if we'll have time to it, time for it. But the other remedy that I would be curious about would be, what does flight or leaving look like today?
Oh yeah, that's a good question too. Let me answer the first one, and then I'll get to flight. So the first question is sort of like, what does force look like? So I have always said,
is it an option today? You know,
is it an option?
Is it a more or
Yes,
less important?
because as Barbara Field says, and I agree, that violence is always forceful, but force is not necessarily violent. So force can be a boycott. Force can be a strike. Force can be your vote. Force can be leaving. Force can be a lot of different things. Force is cancel culture. You know, force is it can take on a lot of different identities. I think that we shouldn't always think that force is a gun or is sort of like an armed resistance. In this particular climate, I do not think that marginalized people can use force as armed resistance because it's not a fair fight. One, we live in like a military state. It would be like bringing a knife to a gunfight. You know, like we have seen how the state has addressed even nonviolence, let alone armed violence. So I don't think it's a fair fight. I don't know, but I also think it's contingent upon, you know, like how things play out. You know, when you're talking about the 19th century and the Wild West, when you're talking about the Ku Klux Klan in your front door, those are different contexts than when you're in Washington, D.C. and you're up against the National Guard. You know what I mean? Those are two different, or many different contexts. So I'm not convinced that armed resistance in that context works. But force, I think, always works. I think force is always, no, to be redundant, forceful. You know, I think it is compelling. I think it is provocative. I think it can be arresting. I think it can be effective. In terms of flight is something that even I have considered now. And because I was like, I got to get out of here. As an academic, as someone who chairs the Africana Studies department, as someone who feels deeply threatened by the current political environment that we're in. I just got back from France on Sunday, and we have students at Wellesley who are like studying abroad. And so I went to do a site visit to visit them. And in my mind, I was like, I'm doing recon. I'm going to go and scope out France and see if I can do my sabbatical here, or if I could live here for a year or something like that. And when I went to France, 2 things happened. One, as soon as the Black students saw me, they told me that they were upset because a white professor had used the N-word in classroom multiple times. And I was like, what? And then we had a Black speaker come in who's like one of the leading speakers in France on like race and anti-Blackness. And she's like, I have to teach all my classes via Zoom because I've gotten so many death threats against my life that it's no longer safe for me to speak in public. Wow. And I was like, okay, so France is not a safe space. So I can't, if she is teaching classes on Zoom in France, how much more would I be targeted with someone who has 2 guns on each cover of a gun on each cover of her book?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I told my husband, I said, anti-Blackness is like Coca-Cola. Like, I have traveled a lot of places. I've been all over the world, and I've always been able to get a Coke wherever I go, always. Even when I was like in a leprosy colony in Thailand, they had Coke, like, and I
Wow.
was like, that is anti-Blackness. It is global. It is everywhere, whether it is classic anti-Blackness or Coke Zero anti-Blackness or cherry flavored anti-Blackness, anti-Blackness, and it is everywhere. And so I say this in the book, flight is the least effective of the tools because, one, it doesn't address the problems at home. It doesn't address the reason why you left. For the people who are stuck and have to stay, flight is not an option for them. And to me, liberation has to be collective. It can't just be for the money class. It can't just be for the intellectuals or the people that have the means to leave. And then lastly, I'll just say that, like, my colleague Chipo Dendere is a brilliant political scientist, and she's writing a book about dictators, particularly on the continent of Africa. She looks at Zimbabwe, and she found that when the intellectual class, when the business class, when the sort of elite or money classes leave, when they flee their countries, that it actually upholds dictatorships, that flight prolongs like oppressive regimes because there's no one there to sort of serve as a buttress to keep these dictators accountable for the underclasses that are poor or less educated. And so flight actually emboldens dictators and fascism.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, then I really can't leave.
Yeah.
I really can't go anywhere as much as I would like to.
Yeah.
But yeah, but
Sure.
flight is okay temporarily. We all need a reprieve. We all need rest. We all need to take breaks. MLK did that a lot. He went to Jamaica a lot, and I think that that's transformative. Knowing that you can leave, and then when you have been replenished, you come and you tap back in. But the work continues.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that when you're talking about force, a lot of things that come to my mind immediately would be like African Americans in Wilmington in 1898 were armed. African Americans in
Yes.
Tulsa in the 1920s were armed and
Yes.
didn't wasn't great, despite the
Yes.
fact that they were armed.
Yes. Being armed does not guarantee you success. So that is a key, I think, component for me. And I also think in a capitalist society, in America, it's a capitalist society, the greatest aspect of force to me is a boycott or a strike. When you withhold your labor, when you withhold your dollar in a capitalist society, you do the greatest amount of harm. That to me has just been tried and true. I think the Montgomery bus boycott is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. Well, I want to stick on the issue of force for a little bit longer because Scott had a question that comes out of some events happening in Lincoln Heights, Ohio. So, Scott, do you want to jump in? So I muted you. Let me. Why did I do that to you, Scott?
I don't know.
Okay, you may speak.
Your prejudice comes out again.
It does. It does. I hate your shirt.
Yeah. With the Lou, Lincoln Heights is a small village north of Cincinnati in Hamilton County, and was targeted by one or more groups of neo-Nazis. And they had a couple of large demonstrations. Lincoln Heights is a little bitty village. It's got like 4,000 people in it. And it was surrounded by much more prosperous, predominantly white, by 10-to-1 communities who ate up most of the tax base. So they don't even have enough money to fund a police force. So they made their own. They started an armed militia. Were stopping white cars full of white people coming through because that had been spreading the leaflets and such. And this made their neighbors hysterical. Just like the Panthers. And I would be, that is implied violence, if nothing else, because they were armed. They were stopping people at gunpoint. and even the Hamilton County Sheriff wasn't doing anything about it. So, because they couldn't, the sheriff department said, we can't protect you.
Well,
so
this is happening now?
This was happening in January and February of this year.
Of this year.
And I figured it was enabled by Trump.
And this is are they a neo-Nazi group? Or
They're neo-Nazi groups, with swastikas and flags and and white.
I mean,
I can send you the Washington Post article.
No, I believe you. I'm just sort of like wow. I mean, normally you hear of neo-Nazis sort of terrorizing people of color or but to terrorize other white people.
This is people of color. This village is 99% black.
It's 99% black. Okay. I thought you were saying they were 99% white. I was like, what?
No, everything surrounding them is lily white.
It's lily white. Okay, got you.
There's this little black island, if you will.
Yeah, got you. What has been their strategy? Do you know, to sort of tackle this? If the local officials won't intervene, how are they navigating that?
As best I can tell, trying to follow it, this is 100 miles north of me. They seem to be, just by showing up armed and knowing that they were going to be met by armed people, the leafleting has stopped, and there have been no more demonstrations. So it's been effective in that sense.
Yeah.
But the hysteria of the people around them for even doing it is what I found very interesting.
Yeah. That is interesting. I mean, goodness. I don't know. Someone put in the chat the Lumbees. I think about the Lumbees as well, like when the Klan was, but the Lumbees were able to outnumber the Klan in that particular incident. But golly, I mean, if I were living in that town, I would definitely be armed. I always think that when people realize that their life is just as much at risk as yours is, they sort of back off a little bit. There's I always find that when you let a bully know that, like, I will not be bullied, that there is sort of a standoff period. Now, that doesn't change the dynamics very much, and it still may not make you feel safe. In some ways, it might make you even more of a target. But gosh, that's troubling. That's troubling, to say the least. And this is why I say that, like, flight is not the best remedy, because for those who have means, sure, leave. But if that's your home, if you don't, or even don't have the means to go, you have to strategize a way to sort of navigate those spaces that you live in without harm, without risk of violence. And you might need to find ways to strategize to bring in other coalitions or to bring in other people that will draw attention to that, and work with you to push some of those groups back and to call out some of those people who they are. I mean, it's going to take more than just that town itself to sort of overcome that, I think. I was not aware.
I was reminded of initially was thinking of the Daisy Bates example in Little Rock, and you had said, what terrified white racists hell-bent on wreaking havoc was not the sight of a gun, but the emboldened attitude of a black person who was unafraid to use it. And so I think that's some of that, and that's not just the only example in the book, but that idea of it's not that they had to fire their guns, but just by virtue of the fact that they showed up and like, we're not going to take this. That sort of is a way of, at least pushing back in that situation. And again, I don't know the resolution to that.
I don't know either, because, now, I mean, we have an administration in office that is not sympathetic to the plight of Black and brown and marginalized people. So, I mean, neither did Daisy Bates, my goodness. But at the same time, I don't know. That's tough.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's hard to answer that question about. So
Yeah.
let's move on. We
Yeah.
have Kirk Wackenheimer's got I guess a double-barreled question. It's not really a double-barreled question because it's two different
No pun
questions.
intended.
Right. So he's got a couple for you. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Kirk.
So my first one, what did little Troy ever do to you? That man was out there fighting for his life. He went platinum, and you're just like, he didn't get any traction. What's a guy got to do?
And I would sing that song. Nobody would know what I was talking about. And I was like, guys, this song is number one. Like, what in the world? And it's so funny because I just did like a talk with a woman from Louisiana, and she was like, oh my gosh, that song was amazing. I was like, right. But yeah, that's too
The album was phenomenal.
it was. Soundtrack to my high school. It's so funny.
And you have
David
another
was giving me a
question.
hard time for asking that question, but he had to
Love
know.
it.
Yeah.
I love that.
All right. So for my serious question, though,
Yes.
sorry, David's jumping around on schedule. All right. So given the structural forces aligned against marginalized communities, especially as evidenced by the privatized prison system, what would be a realistic time frame, assuming sustained effort by all partners and stakeholders for true equality? Is it even possible at this point?
I don't put timelines on things. In my mind, I'm like, with all deliberate speed. But I
mean,
don't
I agree
know.
with you. Let's get there as fast as we can.
Yeah. And I don't know if I've heard two aspects of this. One aspect is sort of like that the more things feel constrained, the more we are at the cusp of a transformative revolution. That we see this like in the abolitionist movement, that when you have all of this sort of political unrest of the 1850s, you get John Brown of 1859, and then boom, it's Civil War. And then 4 or 5 years later, boom, you've got 13th Amendment, 15th Amendment, like all of these rapid changes. But if you were in 1842, I can't tell you, hey, you know what, in 20 years, things are going to be better. You know what I mean? I could not, no one knew when things were going to change. No one could assume that the abolition of slavery would be inevitable or that it would sort of play out the way that it did. I was thinking about sort of like, I was talking to my daughter about Kamala's loss, and I was thinking it could be another 50, 60 years before a woman is put on the ticket again. Like the Democrats are not going to lose 3 times in a row. Like they're not going to use that. They're not going to put another woman up for a while. But the first woman president we get might be a Republican, because Democrats will be so skittish about using a woman, about the fear of losing. And so I think about like both sides of that. Like, are we just on the precipice of something big, or are we in a long period of retrenchment in which it might take a few generations before we sort of resolve this? I am an optimist. I am a glass half full kind of person. I have children. I have to remain hopeful, but I would like to think that the first is true, that we are experiencing sort of the last gasps and struggle of a dying, belief in institution. But I don't know. And I think that not knowing is what compels us, should compel us all to like keep fighting, like to keep the resistance going, because these things are not inevitable. I mean, King says that change is not inevitable. It comes through continuous struggle, constant, continuous struggle. So we can never rest on our laurels. We can never be like, things are all good, because change can always be rolled back. I mean, the voting rights movement has been rolled back. Like all of sort of the progress that we've seen with women's rights have been rolled back. So even some of the gains of like the LGBTQ movement has been rolled back. So the undoing can also be just as swift as the progress. So I don't know. I'm not, and I'm also not one of those scholars that'll be like, by 2037, we will cure racism, you know?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. And even in I think it's in the prologue of my book where I'm like, when people tell you that, they're selling you snake oil. Like, no one knows when things will be better. But it's almost not really a finish line. It has to be a lifestyle. Because once again, if you get there and you pat yourself on the back and say mission accomplished and you stop doing the work, you can never stop doing the work. You know what I mean? Because someone's going to come in and be like, oh, they think they can coast. Here's our resistance, you know? And so you can actually never stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have one more question on our sort of pre-collected questions, and then it looks like we'll have some time for additional questions, whether you're from attendees out there in chat land, please drop your questions in, or panelists if you're holding back something. But I do have to return to the issue of guns because we're primarily formed as a group of scholars and others interested in guns. So in chapter 2 on protection, you talk about the Panthers. And how their most successful form of protection was their free breakfast program for children. And then you also say on the next page, true liberation makes guns obsolete. And I've actually been asked to comment on whether a world without guns is possible. And I can't really imagine that for reasons that I'll hold back. But do you have some optimism about the human condition that I don't share that allows you to imagine a world without guns?
No, I just, and maybe that is fantasy, but I would love to live in a world where guns are not necessary, or maybe guns are purely used for like hunting or sporting activities, but not for harming people, not for, war. I mean, and maybe that sounds, naive. Like, what do you mean no war? Like, but if I can't work toward creating a perfect society, toward creating these lofty goals, then I can't work at all. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can't, if I just get into a position where it's like, well, we're always going to have violence, then you can get very comfortable not fighting against the things that harm people. I also think that and I say this in the book too, that after a year into the Black Panther Party, they put their guns down. They realized that it was actually more of a strike against them than anything else, that they were being harmed more by guns than they were actually working on behalf of their community. And I deeply believe that Hoover and the FBI and COINTELPRO were not as alarmed by Black people with guns as they were Black people who were fed and literate and healthy and confident and capable and all of those other things that the Black Panther Party was trying to instill. They're like, what's the point of being, free or owning a gun if you can't read, if you have no food, if you can't eat, if you don't have a proper education, if you don't have proper housing, a gun is not going to ensure better healthcare. A gun is not going to ensure that you have the things that you need necessarily to survive as a whole person. So when I think about, especially when Erica Huggins takes over, the goal is health, the goal is education, the goal is like mindfulness and spiritual activism, and they're trying to be much more careful and thoughtful about how they tend to the whole body, and tend to the whole community. And protection is a part of that. People needed to be protected from police brutality, but people were also hungry. People were also starving. People were also in failing schools. People were also had no ability to get the care for their diseases and their health concerns. And that was more overriding than anything else. So I'm not one to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm sure you can live in a world where guns exist and people are happy and thriving, but I don't think that there are a lot of societies around the world that don't allow guns. Canada doesn't have guns. Europe doesn't really have guns. And it's not to say those societies are better or healthier, But there is something to be said about navigating in a world where that might not be your biggest fear. Like when I think about my niece, her biggest fear, she won't go to concerts because she's afraid of gun violence. She doesn't like being around crowds because she's worried someone's going to shoot up the place. And we went to a concert in France, and she finally felt like just like this was the first concert I've been to in a while, because she felt safe. And that's not nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's you know, I hear that a lot about people who've stopped going to movie theaters and other things like that.
Yeah.
So.
But Tovis is right. Violence would still exist if there were no guns. Absolutely. Because violence is not just limited to guns. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's a starting point, I guess.
I think, you know, I think there's a lot of people, and maybe some in this group, who would take the position of like, yeah, if we could live without guns, I would be perfectly happy to. They just don't kind of think it's a realistic prospect, but you know, that it's not like you know, we have to have it just as for no particular reason.
Yeah. I believe in the utility of guns, but I'm also not for my cold dead hands. You know what I mean? Like I think there has to be a healthy understanding of their efficacy.
Yeah. Well, excellent. So I have one question in reserve to finish things up with, but who else has a question that either you were thinking of or that you've just thought of to pose here? It looks like Scott has his hand up. Go ahead, Scott, and then JJ.
Let JJ go ahead of me. I've already prattled.
True.
But
okay, go ahead, JJ.
You never prattle, Scott.
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant to say.
So I, you know, as you said, like, so you started kind of putting the book project together in like 2020, 2025 in many ways. I think, at least to me, feels like a kind of completely different world, although a lot of people kind of saw us getting here. And I wonder how you kind of conceive of joy now, and joy is resistance, maybe from when you were writing the book to kind of now and in the situation that we're living under, especially with the way that kind of capitalism and in government together, are like, well, capitalism and the state are kind of working together throughout the text.
Oh, good question. So this may sound silly, but I don't think it's silly at all. I was on Instagram doom scrolling or whatever, and there was a meme or like a TikTok video, and it was like, the whole world is like collapsing, the world is in chaos or whatever. And then it was like Black people, and it was like trying to learn the newest like step dance. But I was like trying to learn the latest, you know, like cowboy or two-step dance or something.
Was it the video of everyone from Abbott Elementary?
No,
line dancing? Because I had a very similar meme of everybody from Abbott dancing, and it was like,
and I was cracking up because, and there was also another video of Black people, and it was a guy who was like, listen, we are still resting. Put your cape back in the closet. Like, learn a new dance. Get your fan. Like, find something that brings you joy. We are not jumping into this fray. This is not our next life. And I feel that with every inch of my body. I feel like I'm going to be a lot more slower and methodical and strategic about how I approach this new reality, because I think people want to be reactionary, and there's something valid about that. You know, like as soon as like Target says we're not doing DI, it's like we're boycotting, we're this, we're that, and I get it, and I'm for it, and I haven't shopped at Target in a while. But like, there's also something about like, we're gonna wait, we're gonna see, we're gonna be strategic. Summer is coming. You know what I mean? Like, protest season is coming. And I am trying to reserve my energy. I'm trying to protect my peace. I'm trying to spend time with my kids. I am trying to compartmentalize, you know, like my husband and I have this new role now where we would get up in the morning and we would turn on like NPR or listen to a political podcast, and we would start our day just being inundated with like doom and gloom. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so my husband was like, all right, new rule. We have to listen to 3 songs before we like start our day. Before we leave this bedroom, we're listening to 3 songs. And so he put on Stevie Wonder, and it was like my whole vibe, my whole outlook changed. I needed something that could pour into me that could just center me before I went out to do battle, you know, whether it's on campus or in my classroom or on the internet or whatever it is. And I think that's really important, that we have to find joy, that joy is a weapon, that joy can fortify you, that it can protect you, that that we should be protective of the things, and we should continue to do the things that we enjoy, whether it's spending time with your family, whether it's listening to music, whether it's getting your nails done, whether it's just something that makes you happy, that gives you a break, that allows you a reprieve. Those things matter. I tell people all the time, there's a picture I like to show of MLK, and he's in Jamaica and he's in the pool and he's shirtless. There's another picture of him like sitting poolside. There's a picture of him like on a veranda in Jamaica, like having dinner with Coretta. And when people see these pictures, they're startled because they're used to seeing King like in a suit, marching, protesting, giving a sermon, you know, doing the work. And it's like, no, King went to Jamaica. No, King was in the pool. No, King had a Mai Tai, you know, like he was finding rest for himself. And I'm like, if Martin Luther King gets to go to Jamaica because he needs a break, like if he's not always in a suit because he understands the importance of rest, and rest is resistance, and rest is radical, then how much more than I need to practice that too. So yeah, I take my joy very seriously, even if it feels silly and superficial. It's not. It does work. It does work. Now it can't be all joy, right?
Right.
You got to be balanced.
Well, this reminds me that it was either Kirk or JJ was supposed to get our virtual book club Spotify playlist going, starting with Lil Troy. And I don't know which one of you said you were going to do that.
I am going to start it. As many of the people in this call know, I work for a gun violence prevention nonprofit, so we have been very busy. But as soon as I have that moment, we will, and Little Troy will be the spiritual
share that with me.
playlist.
Please share the list. I will play it, and that'll be my songs when I wake up in the morning.
There you go. All right, I'm going to sneak in one question, then I'll get to you, John Richardson. Tovis asked, and I was also thinking myself about the cover art, because I think a lot of people probably noticed behind you is a large print.
The artwork,
yes. So tell us about that.
So the artist is Taha Clayton, Taha, Taha Clayton. He's a Brooklyn-based artist. And this painting is actually called Soldier of Love. And it's beautiful. The full picture, you know, has her with laundry hanging in the background. She sort of looks like late 19th century, early 20th century. She's got a beautiful just head of locks above her hair. She's actually like a hair model, the real person. But the real picture is maybe 7 feet tall, like 5 feet wide. It's huge. It's massive. It covers a whole wall. So my publisher was at an art exhibit, and this was like the last painting on the 4th floor of this exhibit. And so when he saw it, he was like, whoa, this looks like the cover to Kellie's book. And so he sent me a picture of it, and he was like, tell me I'm crazy. Do you like this for a cover? What do you think? And I was like, oh my God, I love this. I absolutely love this. And so my husband was funny because he was like, another gun? Really? But because even my first editor was like, are you sure you want to put just a gun on the cover of Force and Freedom? And I was like, absolutely, it's arresting. That's what I want. And that cover, the Force and Freedom cover, like I dreamed it. Like I was like, I just want a white background and a gun. That's all I want. And so the publisher thankfully listened to me. Most authors, you should know, do not get input on their titles and don't get input on their covers. They really don't have a choice. You can say if you don't like something, but for the most part, the publisher's going to do what the marketing team wants to do. But in this case, they let me choose my title and they let me choose the cover, which is just special. Now, I did not do the cover design, but if you notice, her hands are right over the FU. They refused. And I was like, oh, hey, somebody else pointed that out to me. And I was like, oh, snap. But I love it. I think it's a powerful cover. I think it's beautiful. I feel like I know this woman. She's no nonsense. And I kind of wanted that.
Oh, super. And with the book royalties, maybe you can buy the original.
Yeah. Oh, it's already sold. Somebody
Oh,
bought it.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
secondary market.
I got a print, a limited
Yeah.
edition print. So that's
Nice.
what I have to do. Yeah.
All right. I think probably have time just for one more. So I'm going to go with John Richardson. Go ahead, John.
Hi, John.
Well, I will say that the cover reminded me of Ida B. Wells,
Oh, yeah.
and that's who I thought it was initially, except she didn't have a Winchester.
Yeah.
And actually, it's not so much a question as a suggestion for you. There's a book by Kathy Jackson, no relation, called The Cornered Cat. She had 5 kids under 6 and how to deal with a gun in the house with kids under that age.
That's
This
good.
is practical advice.
I had the person who taught my gun safety class. So I took a gun safety class in Boston in Roxbury. The instructor was Black. It was about 40 people in the class. Everybody was Black except for like 2 people. And he said, I teach my children, and he's like a 13-year-old, a 7-year-old, and I think a 5-year-old. And he said, I've taught my children gun safety since they were babies. And I said, how did you do that? And he said he had a gun that was like fake, like a dummy gun. And he said when his daughter was like 18 months, he put it on the floor in front of her just to see how they would interact with it, just to see how they would they play with it, would they not play with it? Yeah, kind of like that. Yes. And he said that his son was immediately like, bang, 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 you know. His daughter kind of picked it up, but was not that interested in it. And so from that moment on, he's always like talked gun safety with his children. Now his 13-year-old knows how to shoot, knows how to handle a gun, is very like informed. He said his son, who's 7, his maturity level is not there yet. You know what I mean? Like, and his youngest is 5. She's aware, she knows like sort of what to do or not to do, but it is almost a daily conversation with them, like how they talk about guns, so that everyone has like a healthy respect for how to handle it. So like he's even told his 13-year-old, like, listen, somebody breaks in the house, you know what to do, you know. like his daughter is very mature, you know, like, and they've talked about that since infancy. I kind of feel like that's the way you have to do it. And it's not too late. My kids are 10, 8, and 5. So she just turned 5, 10, 8, and 5. It's not too late at all. It's just an ongoing conversation my husband and I are still having about, I would like to have a gun in the house. He is much more skittish. So until we get on the same page, and he's the one that served in the military, you know, he's the one that like actually knows how to use a gun. But yeah, it's a lot. And safe storage is a really big deal too. That's a really good question. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We're up against the time limit, but if I can indulge to ask just one more question, a sort of closing question, because I started by saying, you know, it is a forceful history in the sense that it really hits the reader pretty hard, some hard teachings in there. How has the book been received given its content?
Can I tell you, shockingly so well? So well. Like, I have been floored by that. Like, right now, nonfiction is not really selling. Like, the only thing that's selling right now is like romance fantasy, you know, like fairies having sex or something like that. Like, you know, like that seems to be like the bestseller book. But my agent and my editor were like, your book is selling, and it's selling really well. And like, they've been kind of shocked because a lot of other books, but big best-selling authors, have sort of like plateaued or stalled. The book came out in June. It did really well in June. After the election, I saw a huge bump in sales, huge bump. And then with MLK, with Black History Month, with Women's History Month, the book has steadily been selling every week, which makes me feel very good. I'm still on book tour. I'm still talking about the book a lot. Awesome. I thought I would get a lot of pushback when I, you know, did book talks or met with the public. I had one Black woman say to me, you know, I don't want to buy your book. I don't like guns, and I don't like that there's a gun on the cover, and I'm not going to buy your book. And I said, okay, that's fair. I said, well, I'm going to give the talk, and if you still don't agree, that's fine. I gave the talk. Afterwards, she goes, I'm buying 2 copies. She was like, you convinced me. And then one of my friends was like, I'm mad at you. I was like, why? He was like, because now my wife wants to buy a gun. Not typing that, but like I think that I've only had and I've given close to 70 book talks. And I've only had one criticism, which I thought was irrational. This Black man, older Black man in his 70s, said, I don't like your book. I don't like your cover because you need to have a Black man on the cover. And he was like, men are the protectors. Women are like the, he said men are the warriors and women are the protectors, or something very sexist. And I was like, sir, have you read the book? And he was like, no. I was like, then there's nothing to discuss. That's the only issue I've had. Everyone, and I've been waiting for it. Like, and I want feedback. I want critique. I want people to say, hey, I don't like whatever. That has not happened yet. Now, maybe people are too timid to tell me, but I am always open to feedback. I'm always open to even changing things. Like someone who was disabled told me that the language I used about the use of limp and referring to Black people and racism as a limp was problematic in the disabled community. And I said, thank you for sharing that. My paperback is coming out in November. I still have time to make changes. I can change that language. I don't want to have offensive language in my book. And if that's offensive to this disabled community, then I'll change it. And so I'm not opposed to it, but I haven't gotten it, shockingly.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. We appreciate you including us on your book tour-ish. We really enjoyed. I think this is the 5th book we've read. I'm losing track of the count, but it was definitely one of the favorites for a lot of people. Even despite the fact that it wasn't gun-centric. So thank you so much for taking some of your time.
Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you for taking the time to read my book.
Absolutely. Thank you, and good luck down the road.
All right. Bye, guys. Be well and be safe.
Thanks.